Cool?
Cool. Thank you.
Nice job.
Yeah, no, it's been tremendous.
That was
Life-changing.
You don't have to live with pain or chronic neuro issues any longer. In this podcast, you will learn how to stabilize your brain, body, and biochemistry for the rest of your life. I'm Dr. Teams, and this is the Neuro Reset Podcast. Okay. So I think, get excited when a patient asks all the technical questions because we're like, ooh, let us show you what, we went to school for this, right?
Yeah,
to be able
exactly,
to answer it.
Exactly.
And a lot of patients are just like so cooked by the time they get here that they're like, can you help me or not?
Yeah.
And I'm like, I just went through
The
like
details.
a 30-minute presentation, and they're like, I'm not going to remember any of that because my brain doesn't work. I'm
Yeah,
like, oh, geez.
yeah.
So,
I know.
we got to feel it out in the history. We've got like right out of the gate, I could tell your level of intelligence just by how you were very quickly putting things together that we were talking about. And so like those are the times where I'm like, well, I'll explain all the details if you want to know,
Right,
but if you don't
right.
have the capacity, then we just wait.
Yeah.
We hold off on it.
Yeah.
So, hey everybody,
Okay.
welcome back to another episode of the Neuro Reset Podcast. We have a very special guest. I guess everybody's special, to me at least. And we've got Jenny here. She's joining us from the Bay Area?
Yeah, that's right.
From the Bay Area. Helping out, really stabilizing and regulating a lot of her nervous system symptoms that she's been dealing with. She's got quite a journey that she's been on, and quite the story overall. And she needs a little practice telling it,
All right.
because she's going on tour here in a couple of months. But
That's right.
ultimately, I'm gonna let Jenny kind of give us some information on what's been going on in her life. Yeah.
Okay.
So welcome.
Thank you.
I'm sure you're going to be a natural here. Your PR person's going to be very impressed. And so.
Oh, good. That's good news.
And so, the first question I usually ask is, what caused you to reach out to us?
Good question.
First place? Yeah.
So I've had vestibular migraines and benign positional vertigo for a lot of years, and it would happen a few times a year. And I learned to self-treat and to find the practitioners that could support me, but I never really got to root cause in terms of what was causing it. And with migraines, a lot of people have it, and they just accept that that's the way it is, and it's caused by the triggers, whatever they may be, right? Food, stress. But then it started getting worse. And I would say about last few years, I'm a skier, so I go to Lake Tahoe a lot, and I was finding the last 5 years that every time I went to altitude, I was starting to get dizzy. And I was getting vertigo more frequently, and I thought, wow, what is going on? To the point where this last ski season, it was almost starting to feel continuous, that I was always on the verge of feeling dizzy. And then also I was getting more neck and shoulder chronic issues in terms of pain and achiness, and I'd go to get massage, and it'd get better, and it'd be back in 2 days. And so it just felt intractable. And it was getting to the point where I was also getting just more minor headaches on a regular basis. And so that's when I reached out and said, I've got to figure this out,
Right.
or get help.
Right.
So.
And so, what's interesting is the way that you describe it, right? You come from a very high performance background where things might not be considered kosher if you talk about those things all the time, right?
Right.
And the way you described it, like the mildness, occasional, but I mean, when you got here, it was having a fairly big impact on your life, right?
That's
and so connecting, helping people understand what nervous system dysregulation sounds like over time is exactly what she's saying, right?
Right.
It's like you knew years ago when you're like pressing for a deadline or whatever it was, and you're like, I'm staying up for days at a time trying to get this thing done.
Right.
And then your symptoms are there, but you're like, I just got to get this done. Right. And so what's ultimately understanding what the impact of that stuff is, we could summarize it and say it's burnout.
Yes.
Right.
Right.
But then other things, other life happenings will always impact that intensity of the burnout, right? So the burnout is often already in place and it's happening, but we just don't know it because we've been doing it for so long like this, that this is a new normal.
Right.
And then all it takes is, it could be a small straw that breaks the camel's back, or a large straw that breaks the camel's back. And that's when the true dysregulation becomes very difficult to regulate yourself. Right. And I know we're kind of talking, and I'm kind of talking in vagues here, because you have a lot of details that you may or may not want to share. So that's why I'm speaking in vagues.
Well, I mean, I think I want to share it because I think it could help a lot of people who
Yeah.
have been in a similar situation. So being here really caused me to kind of reflect and think back to, like, when did the migraines start? When did the dizziness start? And it went back about, I would say, 14 to 16 years. And that was the first really stress point in my career, where I was working for a company in San Francisco, commuting from the suburbs. It was probably about an hour and a half each way, driving, and back before people worked from home. And I think between that and a highly political environment on the job, which is what a lot of us deal with in big companies, right? And a fast pace. And 3 years of doing that was enough, I think, to start what began to happen.
For sure.
Right, physically.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, I went to a calmer job. I went to a shorter commute. Everything should be better. And things just keep happening, right? You kind of go through that. Things calm down. And then I took another job where for 7 years it was really high stress, and it was very reactive and operational. And so you never knew when some crisis was going to come up. And while I had a great team, I was still the person who was responsible for, fixing things, addressing things. And I think in leadership roles in organization, you're paid to be problem solvers and maybe over-index on that. As an overused muscle.
Sure. Like it doesn't stop when you check out.
Right.
Yeah, and
exactly.
it becomes full systems go without recognizing it.
Yeah, you don't know how to turn it off, and you don't realize that.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So a lot of people listening will probably wonder, what did it feel like while you were in those positions, right? Did you feel the burnout happening? Or did you recognize it while you were in those positions, or like where along those lines? Because, right, we're talking now, reflecting back, it was definitely happening then.
Right.
What makes you say that it was happening then?
Well, so that first job where I had the big commute, it got to the point in the second year where weekends I was exhausted. I pretty much was on the couch or taking a nap. And in my personal history, I was never a napper. So I thought, that's interesting. This job is really exhausting me, and I'm using weekends to recover from my week. So that was the first inkling, and I was having trouble sleeping as well because I think the stress was getting to me. That other job, the more recent one, I ended up getting diagnosed with reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, right? And back then, I think most people didn't know what that was. I mean, doctors didn't know how to diagnose it. I found a functional medicine doctor who figured it out, but it took a battery of tests to really understand it. We understand it better now. It's in the news a lot because a subset of long COVID patients have reactivated Epstein-Barr, and that's what caused exhaustion, the brain fog, the achiness. But at that time, I wasn't willing to really admit that I was having problems.
Right. Because expectations were here, and you're starting to recognize performance was lower than that, right?
Right. So I told no one at work, which is kind of typical, I think, of people in leadership roles where you feel like you have to be strong, you've got to make things happen, and you just go sort out your personal stuff or whatever you're not feeling well about on the weekends, right, or in the evenings. And I just kept going. I kept going. I went on a treatment protocol, but I told nobody about it except close friends and family.
Yeah.
So.
Interesting. Okay, so symptom-wise, it was mostly just fatigue, like recovery?
The migraines got worse.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Then I used to get vestibular migraines where it was painless and I would just have the vertigo, the dizziness. And then it would pass eventually, or it might lead into benign positional vertigo where I had to get the Epley maneuver, and I learned to self-treat. What happened during that time with the reactivated virus was I was starting to get full-on visual aura, the headache, everything. And as I kind of worked through that protocol, it got better. But I would say then what happened was my husband was in a plane accident and died a few months later, and that's why what brought me to Phoenix 5 or 6 years ago. And I think that was the straw that broke the camel's back. And I thought to myself, afterwards, I went on a healing journey. I did a lot of emotional work on myself. I really felt like I was doing great, learned to meditate, but didn't realize how disconnected I still was from my body, and that anything that started to come up that would trigger me, like even a spreadsheet, seeing a spreadsheet would trigger sort of that old type A behavior that I felt like I couldn't control. And so I realized how disconnected I had become to my body. And I didn't realize that till I got here. And,
Right.
You kind of went through the diagnosis with me.
Yeah.
So
when you came in, where would you estimate like that level? And it's a tough way to do it, right? It's very subjective, but that estimated level of performance, where were you at when you first came in?
I would say it was fast approaching maybe 40%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I mean, in the past, it felt like I was 70, but now it was really degenerating. I would say the last couple of years to about 40%.
Oof.
Well, and, I worked my life around it.
Yeah.
So what you get trained in business is you de-risk everything. And you say, okay, well, I left the corporate life, but now I'm going to make sure that I spread out meetings or appointments with people. I am always waiting for the next shoe to drop in terms of I feel great today, but tomorrow I could really feel terrible.
And so you plan accordingly?
I planned accordingly, and I spread commitments out through the week.
Did the world get smaller for you because of this?
Yeah. So, for example, what brings me joy is skiing. I love to ski, and this last season was kind of awful because I was really limited in my ability to ski because I was getting migraines, and I'd have to go see a vestibular therapist, and that would tie me up for 4 or 5 days in recovery, right, where I just really didn't feel well. So I ended up compromising, and I came home and I saw a primary doctor who said, I said to her, what is going on? Should I see an ENT? Should I see a migraine doctor? And she said to me, just stop going to altitude. And I thought,
it hurts, don't do that.
What a response,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's when I suddenly said, oh no, is my life about to get smaller? For example.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So let's see. You came in, and we engaged in an intensive, right? It was
right.
You're in a unique position where you had, the summer. You have a little more time than you're used to,
Right.
and so we went with a more intense 2 weeks, and then a little bit less intense 2 weeks after that.
Right.
So usually we would have done a 3-week intensive all day. With people from out of town. And we discussed this. I think that was going to be the best approach because we need a little extra time because you did have a lot of straws on that camel's back, right? And there was probably a lot in there that that still probably hadn't been fully dealt with, right? And then we referred you to the hypnotherapist local that we like to refer to, and I think that helped a lot as well.
Yes, absolutely.
And so you guys got along great too, right?
Yeah, we did.
And,
we hit it off.
And so when we engaged, like, what were your expectations coming in?
Well, I didn't know about the hypnotherapy, so I had no idea that we were going to work on kind of unconscious belief systems that were affecting my behavior and stress response. I didn't understand that much about how much the vestibular system and the eyes are a window into your nervous system. I just didn't understand how the nervous system was wired that way.
Yeah.
And so that was a surprise. I mean, you mentioned that on the phone when we had our first intake call, but I didn't fully understand it till I got here.
Yeah. So let's see. How can I? You're so good with your words. You're very short, very direct, and so you answer a lot in a very short amount of time. So I want to keep this going as long as we can.
It's a little dense, huh?
Well, it's awesome, right?
Yeah.
It's so so. When we went through the testing, right? So we test the eyes. If needed, we test balance and we test coordination, and then we test the autonomic system, which is our automatic blood pressure, heart rate, sweating, nail growth, hair growth, pupillodilation, swallowing saliva, the hair stand up on your skin. All that stuff happens automatically, right? I don't remember what yours presented as, but I think it wasn't stable. Do you
Yeah,
remember?
no, my eye gaze was not stable. It oscillated.
Uh-huh.
Right?
Oh,
It
that's
was jaggedy.
right. Yeah.
I had no
There was a
idea.
lot of that.
That was a huge surprise. So there was jitter in my eye gaze. There was, you said blood flow and oxygen wasn't good throughout my body. And when I sat down and stood up, my heart rate and my blood pressure stayed the same when it should increase, which suggested, you said, my nervous system was frozen.
Right. And so like stuck in
Yeah.
a certain gear,
Right.
And it's all coming back now. So
Yeah.
so if you guys can imagine, we've got a graph. On the left side is the beginning of the test. On the right side is going to be the end of the test. And about halfway through, so the first half, she's just laying down with blood pressure cuffs on, pulse oximeters on, and a little EKG on. So we're testing heart rate, blood pressure, SpO2, so oxygenation to different parts of the body. And she's just laying there normally. Then we have everybody, she did it as well, do a deep breathing routine to see how the heart rate and blood pressure responds. When it's normal, we're going to get usually an inverse response, and they're going to react properly, and it's going to happen consistently for the exact number of breaths that we take. Then we're going to do a deep breathing or more of a Valsalva, and so we're supposed to see a larger movement away from what the baseline was, and so that's going to look more like scallops on, so like a drop and then an increase, a little drop and an increase, and then a big drop and an increase. And that's over the course of about a minute. And then you'll have a corresponding opposing blood pressure spike. So as the heart rate goes down, the blood pressure goes up to create normal cardiac output. So as you do a deep breath and your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure is going to drop to kind of keep or to adapt to a new stressor. Okay. And then when we stand up, most commonly, we're going to see blood pressure increase and heart rate increase, but then it's going to stabilize a little bit lower back towards normal, but probably elevated slightly above a resting position laying down. And so in most cases, we see this up and this down, up and down. There's a variability, a good amount of variability. So think of like a small little Richter scale needle that just kind of very lightly moves up and down. And then when we do these challenges, we'll have those bigger moves. Well, yours basically just stayed the same, almost like a flat line all the way through.
Yeah.
And so what I knew immediately is that her nervous system, the automatic stuff, was not adapting to anything, right? So, of course, when you go up to altitude and there's the same amount of oxygen but less pressure getting to your tissue, it's going to struggle significantly when you're up there because your cardiac system, I say your autonomic system is not delivering the oxygenation because the heart rate's not changing like it should and the blood pressure's not changing like it should. So that's one of the reasons why it became so symptomatic up at altitude. Yeah.
Yep.
Let alone under load of skiing, where you're supposed to have that heart rate, blood pressure change to this higher demand.
Exactly.
With less oxygen pressure, of course, like your system fell apart.
Yeah. I mean, like it all made sense when you shared the details with me, right?
Yep.
And here I was thinking, oh, am I dehydrated? Am I not drinking enough? Am I, what am I doing wrong?
Well, that's the thing with the nervous system is most people can feel it, but they don't know how to explain it. And it's an invisible thing to everybody else, right? Like I'd say 90+% of people, almost 95+, will go to their cardiologist, they'll pull a Holter monitor on, and they won't find anything. They'll do the stress tests, they'll do all the tests. Hey, your heart's like perfectly normal. Right? You'll go to the neurologist, you'll get your MRIs, right? And it's like, hey, there's like microvascular stuff here from probably chronic stress, but we don't see anything wrong.
Right.
So there's no tumor, right? And you made a comment, you went to a certain place, right? So what did your journey look like going through the medical
world? Can we
world?
back up? Because it was really interesting, because back to the glimmers of things that you see, but because you're going to specialists, they don't see the whole picture.
Right.
So for example, every year I go to the optometrist, I'm nearsighted. And she always said on the visual test that there was sort of an upper right corner where I wasn't seeing the dots. And now I understand why. I was missing them on the vestibular or the eye test when I got here. And it's not because I don't see. It's not a vision issue.
Right.
It's a nervous system issue,
right?
With the jitter. And then the other thing that started to make sense was, what was the other one? I forgot. There was that and...
The MRI, the no tumor?
I was having episodic high blood pressure.
Oh, yeah.
And like maybe before a medical procedure, it would go up, and they'd say, "Oh gosh, we got to have you take this medication to bring it down." And then I'd say, "Gee, do I have a reason to be concerned? Is my blood pressure high in general?" And they said, "Well, your lifestyle's so healthy, so just use the blood pressure monitor and cuff and test it for 10 days in a row at home, first thing without coffee." And it was always normal. And so it was also puzzling, right?
Sure.
Why was I getting high blood pressure? And I realize now I was more susceptible with the nervous system dysfunction.
Sure.
That it would go up
Yep.
pretty fast in certain situations.
Yep. So it's interesting that you describe this journey of like the blood pressure, and then we do our autonomic test and we see what we see. So there's another thing, like just recently, in the last 24 hours, I saw a patient referred from a naturopath. On the intake form, they're suspecting that they have POTS, but they've already been diagnosed with adrenal insufficiency. So in most of your adrenal tests, right, like I mentioned, we used to do functional medicine quite often, run the tests, go over the labs, do all the supplements. But we found that more you stabilize the system, the more the other stuff works. Right, so like all the other specialists that people see, all of a sudden their stuff starts working like really well, because the body's working the way it should, right? And so when you look at an adrenal test, in the beginning, in the acute stressors, your cortisol is going to elevate, right? Which is where your blood pressure is going to elevate.
Right.
And the longer you're under that situation, it's going to basically deplete the adrenal component. So this adrenal insufficiency patient that comes in, the question isn't, well, what is the stressor? It's tell me, when did the stressors start? And in this particular case, it was like when they were young, parents fighting, all that stuff. So it was a very toxic, sympathetically driven or fight or flight driven system from a very young age. So they had to overuse it, and then it depleted long before it ever should have. Right? So your blood pressure was acting the same way. That blood pressure spike is telling us that something's wrong. Is it specific to the nervous system? Kind of, sort of. Right? Could be kidneys, could be a lot of other things, right? But if you look at the history, your lifestyle's so healthy, but your blood pressure's going up. It's just like that. To me, it's the canary in the coal mine. So when somebody is at a level that you were at, just super high performing, a lot on your shoulders, in a leadership position, managing a lot of people, deadlines that have to get done or else, and then you're finding yourself starting to dip on the weekends or have to recover, where before you used to go up, just pop over to Lake Tahoe? Yeah, and go skiing
or go hiking,
and so like having to skip those things. That's that first sign that something's going wrong. That's right. It's the first check engine light is I can't perform like I used to perform. And then you start actually having signs. So there's symptoms and then there's signs. Signs are things that we can prove. Right? That's the eye testing, that's the autonomic testing, that's your cardiac, that's your blood pressure, that's your heart rate. That's your blood sugar, that's your adrenal system that you do tests on, right?
I think a lot of people, including myself, thought, oh, well, if I just change my external circumstances, it'll get better. Like I left the 3-year job, that was the big commute. I went to a senior job for 4 years. I went to another job that ended up being super exciting, but extremely stressful, right? And so you think, but then you realize your symptoms just sort of continue. Like something has gone into, the dysfunction has become steady state.
Right. So that's the piece where some of that subconscious stuff comes in. But that first day, we started talking about, like, I think the question was, who in your family is like you?
Right. Yes.
And so, in a way, we have these things called mirror neurons where we monkey see, monkey do, right? That's how, kids copy us when they're young. Right? And so, in fact, as an example, just recently I had an almost teenager that has some things going on, and he was mirroring everything that everybody was doing when he would talk to them. So his mirror neurons were active, which is inappropriate for the age. Those are supposed to go away at a younger age. So we know that we need to activate that brain to the point where it inhibits those, right?
Interesting.
So monkey see, monkey do, those go-go-goers are very commonly influenced by other go-goers.
Right, right.
And not only that, but it's the tuck it inside in the sense of don't tell anybody about your problems, right?
Yeah.
And then you just go until you can't go anymore.
Right.
But nobody tells you that part.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I
Right.
think we had a conversation about that, and I think I told you that my dad came from a military family, and you said, I knew that already, Jenny, before you shared that. I was kind of astounded by that, but I think it's, and remind me if I'm repeating this incorrectly, but it was the stoicism, right? That I'm
Correct.
pretty stoic,
Well,
and have always gotten feedback that I'm very calm through chaos,
right.
right?
Which is a great asset,
Right.
but it's also a double-edged sword if it runs your life.
Right.
Right? Because you lose that ability to offload.
Right.
Right? To take a moment for yourself, right? And that's the
Right.
toughest part about it
Yeah.
all. And it means nothing to me about weakness. Right? To open that up.
Right.
But it tells me a ton about behavior.
Yeah.
And so it showed me very quickly when you were sharing the story originally about your husband being in the crash.
Yeah.
You were telling it almost like you read it in an article. Oh, wow. Right?
Yeah.
And obviously it was a life-changing moment. But your trained behavior at that point took over because it was a high-stress situation.
Right.
So you just went through it like this,
Yeah.
where your internal system is just going haywire.
Right.
You're doing everything, stressing yourself out more to try to let everybody know you're okay.
Right.
But you weren't.
Yeah. That's right.
And then, you mentioned when you were here in Phoenix, you developed great relationships with a lot of the practitioners. And that's where you started to notice, I think, that maybe you weren't okay, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it took that type of
Yeah.
event
Yeah.
to help you understand that for
Right,
yourself,
right.
right? And
Yeah.
it's obviously very unfortunate.
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge traumatic event, right? To have someone you love go through a traumatic injury like that. And I think the nurses became my second family, and they were so supportive and loving and just incredible. And I think it made it okay for me sometimes to fall apart.
Yes.
But I did it all in private, and I think most people that I knew, we had something like over 500 friends and acquaintances follow everything that was going on a private community online platform, because I was posting every day, and they would say, it's incredible how strong you are, Jenny. And, I think that probably reinforced what I picked up from my dad, having come from a military family who also had a very challenging, demanding job and career. And I saw him burn out, but it was all in private. And so I'm sure that's where I got my early role modeling from.
Yeah.
To your point,
Yeah.
right? So
And that's the one thing I think we probably talked about, and other people might have talked to you about that as well. But when people come in with a problem and the history supports that burnout, right? There's oftentimes the physical stuff that occurred, plus it's the habits and behavior run right along with that because technically the behavior allowed it to occur, right?
That's right.
And so one of the things that we really focus on is helping you understand that certain behavior can drive this type of breakdown. So we have that conversation usually from the beginning.
Yeah.
And a lot of people make the comment, well, I just want to get back to my old self. And I'm like, my question is are you sure?
Right.
Because that self is what got you here.
Exactly.
And so what have you learned on that side from just the experience here and working with our Skip?
Yeah.
What have you learned about that?
Well, our first meeting, you asked me a really important question, or at least you made a statement, which was you have to love yourself in order to fully heal, right? And you said, I can help you here at the clinic on the nervous system and the physical side of things, but someone like Skip is there to help you with what else is going on around your behavior that's driving it to cause the dysfunction. And I remember thinking, and I may have even said this to you, Dr. Teams, I said, I love myself. I mean, I had a happy childhood. You know, I had no trauma in childhood. I was really close to my dad. My mother had issues, but I felt loved by my dad, and we had a close relationship for a lot of years. He died on the younger side, but for the formative years, he was there for me. And then what I realized was I love my strong self. I don't love my weak self. And it's why I could never go there. Even when Mark, my husband, was in the plane accident, I always felt like, and I talk about this in my book that's coming out in October, where I would go to the edge of the cliff, metaphorically, and I'd pull back. Because if I were to fall apart, I felt like I had to be strong for him the 5 months he was at the Arizona Burn Center. And so I had to make all the medical decisions, a lot of the life and death decisions and risk that went with surgery. And I felt like I had to be strong for him.
Because it was your job.
Yeah, it was my job. He was in a medically induced coma because burn injury is one of the most painful injuries you could have. And so for the 5 months he was there, he was in a coma except for the last 2 weeks. And so I had to be strong. I mean, I felt like I positioned it with myself that I didn't have a choice during that time.
And,
yeah,
you know, you guys listening could imagine the effect that just that situation alone, not even the stressful career that you described, just that, the intensity of that stressor, how that could dysregulate the system, right? And again, I would say the same thing that everybody else said on that forum of like, you're so strong, right? So when you get to behavior, that's what's funny about it, because it's the one thing that supports the breakdown and the burnout, but it's the other thing that keeps you from breaking completely.
Right. That's right.
You know, and you got to love it, but you got to use it for what it's best for, right? And if it can do that, all you got to do is teach it how to heal. And then not do the stuff that got you there in the first place.
One thing that Skip helped me with, he had me read Mind Over Medicine, so a book by Dr. Lisa Rankin, which I understand now is a classic. And that book was really instrumental for me, which is your body is capable of healing itself. So having the belief and the faith that you can get there, it's a very empowering message. The second was, she said, if you think of wellness as sort of a stack of rocks on the cliffs, on the coast, like in Northern California, there are a lot of these cairns, which are perfectly balanced. And she said, a lot of people think that your physical health is the foundation rock of that cairn, when in fact that represents your whole life, and that the sum of your life and how you live it, if it's out of balance, is what causes the problems around physical health, and not the other way around, right? And so if anything's out of balance, that's what causes the stress response that may not be healthy, and that it can normally be very resilient as long as everything's in balance. And when she talks about each of the individual rocks, she's referring to all the life elements, like work-life balance, your career, your family,
simple things,
relationships, everything.
Relationships, nutrition, you reacting to a driver on the highway, right? All of these things, and I still haven't read that, but you gave that to me, so that's in the queue to read.
It's a great book,
and I fully agree with that. Right? You know, I can't remember who said it. It was one of those famous quotes. But if you think you can, or if you think you can't, you're probably right.
Interesting.
And so if you're like, I can't heal, if you keep saying that to yourself, guess what? You have a good chance of not doing. You're not healing. If you know that you can get better, right? Talking to people who say, we talk to a lot of patients that are in a lot of different places, and there's some people that we use the term spin, like, you're spinning, you need to stop spinning. Right. And they think they're doing good by talking about all their problems, but in reality, it's actually reinforcing their problems.
Right, exactly.
It's almost justifying the fact that they're sick because of their problems.
Right.
And it may be true in some cases, but in many cases, if you change your mind, it's that foot in the door to start healing, right? It's the piece that's under your control. then it makes our job that much easier to coach you through and to help and just to create and just to go through the exercises, and the tolerance improves and the nervous system reactivity goes down, all of these things.
So I think what's scary about that, though, to do what you're describing, is to let go of control and to have the belief that your body can heal itself. That's a scary proposition if you're suffering.
Totally.
And I think for those of us who've worked in leadership roles in organizations, we're paid problem solvers. And so it was very interesting. I read a quote a few weeks ago that really resonated for me, which was this guy on social media said, "Stop making every thought a problem to solve." And I thought, wow, that's me, right? I've become a compulsive problem solver, and I've become that way about my own health, which then over-indexes on everything that shows up as a symptom. I got to go figure out a fix. And when you're spinning your wheels around trying to figure out the proper diagnosis, that can be a recipe for even more stress. You start creating a stress cycle for yourself over that. Right?
Let alone Google University.
Oh gosh, that I'm sure lots of practitioners get that a lot. Well, I read on Google. Right.
Well, and there's actually not the last podcast with
John.
It was the one before with Amy. Like, she sat there and told the same story that you're describing. She was in like a leadership role, and she had to hit rock bottom and literally be told at like a psych facility, we can't admit you because you're too cognitive. Like, you're too there. Like, she's smart, she has all that. She's just so burned out that her body was failing her.
Right. Wow.
And she talked about this in the podcast, and she's like, I went home and I started Googling medical assisted suicide. Oh, wow. And she said she found herself stopping and like, I don't want to do that. I just don't want to feel like this. And then she made a decision and created the belief, like, you know what? Screw this. Like, I'm just going to get better.
Yeah.
And it's like she gave up that control of her fixing everything.
Right.
And she just kind of like, the way she described it was, she just accepted her and let her symptoms be.
Yeah.
I'm screwed up right now. This is what happens when this is what the symptoms are telling me.
Yeah.
Just let them be. Like, I know I'm not dying. I've been at the ER 12 times. Like, I know I'm not dying.
Right.
But I'm also not healing.
Wow.
So let's like maybe let Doc do his thing, and I'll actually listen.
Wow.
You know?
Yeah.
And
what
it's
a story,
and it's really
though.
hard when you are you're used to being right all the time.
Right. Right.
Honestly, this part, my wife totally gets this, right?
Yeah.
No, like, I'm used to being right all the time at the office.
Yeah. That's
Not all the time, but a lot of the time, right?
Yeah, that's
At
right.
least people come here seeking the education, the knowledge, and experience we have accumulated at this office over the last like 15 years. And in a matter of 6 weeks, 8 weeks,
7 weeks now.
7 weeks.
I've got one more week to go.
And where are you now as far as your percentage?
I would say 80%. And I'm fingers crossed hoping it stays that way, because I'm headed into a little more stressful times, right? And it'll be a good test to see if I've gone through the behavior change and the belief system change that I've been working on.
And I think you have.
Have you?
Right?
Well,
It's not just a test, right? So this is that part of the belief. It's like, you know what? I'm feeling this good, and I know that I can keep working on this.
Yeah.
At the same time, I'm excited to watch my new behavior help me get through this next stressor, as opposed to that. And this is a simple reframing, right? Where I hope, you can hope all the time, but if you can also make it happen, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so just that's like that, like that's what stuff that happens in real time at the office, right?
Right.
And it's just a couple of words that we change to just support what we're trying to create, right?
Yeah.
So, and I'm excited to see how it goes as well.
Yeah. I mean, Skip helped me, one of the things he helped me see, and he'll bring up the right questions, but you come up with your own answers on this, right? Which was, I realized, I thought, I don't deserve to feel this way. I spent so many years optimizing all the treatment I could figure out within my control or to manage my life to kind of avoid putting myself in situations where I suddenly would feel so bad I'd have to cancel 10 things, right? And it was just such a relief. And to be able to say to the migraines and the dizziness that, thank you. You were an early warning indicator to try to tell me that my body was struggling because I was driving it into the ground. Mm-hmm. And, now that I'm treating myself better, right, and taking care of myself, thank you. I don't need you anymore, right? That was really huge for me.
Yep.
And to stop making everything a problem to solve.
Right.
I think going back to that and relaxing into it and believing that things are going to work out, right, with the right help. Mm-hmm. So that was really, really, really important for me. And so, back to your question of what's changed, I think I may have mentioned about 3 weeks and 3 days into my time here, my breathing suddenly shifted. So I'd gone through my usual morning protocol. I was headed into a second round of that. And when I was doing the eye exercises at the start of it, I suddenly it was like someone flipped a switch. My breathing was deeper in my belly and in my lungs. And I hadn't realized that my breathing had gotten so shallow. Mm-hmm. And it's like the boiled frog syndrome. I think it happened very gradually over time. And then I got in the car the next morning and I'm breathing going, has it gone back to the shallow breathing? Oh, no, it's still deep. And then I had a favorite Bruno Mars, Lady Gaga song that came on the radio. Right? And I remembered Robert, my partner, is a singer in a band, and he can hit the higher notes better than I can. And I'm the woman, right? I was always a second alto. And I started singing, and I thought, oh, my God, I can hit the high notes now in a way that I didn't before. My voice had gotten so monotone and so restricted because of the breathing.
Yep.
And so I think that's when things started to really shift. And then I think in the last 2 weeks, I think just a week ago, I finally went through a whole weekend where I had no headaches. Because I was still getting the headaches on the weekend, not migraines, and the dizziness is gone.
Right.
So, wow.
And then we didn't, for the neck stuff that you were dealing with, that was what, 2 weeks of we didn't touch your neck, right?
Right.
And you were talking, you're like, my neck pain's basically gone.
Gone. Yes, for sure.
And so, our goal with most of these intensives are to get people up to that 80%.
Yeah.
At least, right? But very commonly, and I mean, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2 cases, so less than 10%, probably 90+% of the cases that fly in, we're able to get to 80+%.
Because of the intensive, right?
Because of the intensive, yeah. And the ones that don't or hadn't gotten that far either had other factors that were out of even our control.
Right.
Say like a lot of pain stuff. So like a lot of joint issues, like true joint destructive issues, that pain's going to remain. But we can still rewire the system so that you can heal from whatever procedure you need to do, which I just saw an update on a patient we saw last year, all sorts of like genetic related issues in terms of like destroying joints. Yeah. And she's back to like she was a professional wakeboarder. And she's back to kind of throwing her crutches away and her walkers away, and she's back to boarding again. Wow. And so so we worked with the nervous system to ideally get her system to a point where it could heal so that she could have these surgeries and heal from those properly, right?
I would encourage people who come do intensives to really just get off all your digital devices. I mean, I decided that I was just going to be kind to myself during this time and 100% focus on my health, because it would be the medical leave I should have taken 8 years ago.
Exactly.
Right.
And to that point, right, it's almost like a medical vacation.
Yeah.
If you look at it like a medical vacation or a healing vacation, it's work, but it's work that should have been done a long time ago. Right. So give yourself the grace that you should have. Right. And at the same time, that 3-week timeline, you're on a different timeline, but in that 3 weeks, we create like a new world to go back to.
Right.
right? Because if we go right back into the exact same world that we were in, problem solving everything, everything's a fire that we have to put out. We crank that nervous system back up, and then we just start that same destructive process again.
Right.
So that's, going back to what we talked a little bit about in the beginning was, do we want to go back to who we were?
Right. It's a good question.
Right. And that's only you can answer that.
Right.
And if that's the case, if that's what you want, great. Then we might just be friends.
Yeah.
Right. Every year you come by and we do that. And we've got people that do that too. And that's fine.
I think it's getting clarity about who you want to be.
Yeah, for sure.
And living that and trying it on for size, right? So you kind of understand what it feels like, not just in theory, but actually day-to-day practice.
And so usually when we do more of a closeout before, so like you're coming back, the next time you're back, we're going to review more. What are we going to do when you go back to the real world?
Right.
What are we going to do on this book tour?
Right.
How are we going to do these things? Here, what kind of tools do we need to have with
Right.
us? Because we know it's going to be stressful.
Right.
But the beauty is you're not putting out any fires or fixing anything at this
Yeah.
point. You're sharing a healing journey.
Right.
Right? So you're not looking to fix anybody else.
Right.
You've done that part, right?
Right.
You've done that part by writing the book.
Yeah.
And now you just get to hang out with people.
I know. I thought to myself, instead of thinking about the stress of it, it's thinking about how I'm going to enjoy it.
Right.
Right.
I see a lot of parents, often the stay-at-home parent, I have to this. I have to that. I have to this. I have to take my kid here. I have to take my kid there. I have to take my kid there. Totally understand that.
Yeah.
I don't have kids, so I don't know what that's like. But
Yeah.
listen to what difference one or two words make. I get to. I get to.
Yeah.
I get to take my kid, my youngest, to school at 8:30, and then I get to drop my oldest off at school at 9.
Right.
And then I get to do whatever for myself that day. And then I get to go to hockey that night, or I get to go to right?
Yeah.
There's some kids that don't get a parent there ever.
Wow.
And so having that opportunity,
Yeah.
you can create whatever you want out of
Right,
it, right?
right.
And that's the whole side of healing and treatment that not a lot of people talk about. Some are just naturally gifted and they are able to create that into natural conversation without even realizing it.
Right.
And those are often people that are going to be called healers,
Yeah.
right? You just don't realize what they're doing, but they're doing it. And then we're just a little more systematic about that because we're dealing with a very sensitive patient base because these nervous systems can be so on guard,
Yeah.
right? That we got to be pick and choose these battles early on.
Right.
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 Intensives, you're coming in to just get after it, right?
Yeah,
And so it's
yeah.
like, hey, whatever goes. But there is a time and a place. Like we didn't give you everything to do day one, right?
Right.
We had to work our way up.
Which I'm glad, because I was really headachy, dizzy that first week or
Right.
two.
So that nervous system was already like in that burnout phase when
Right.
you walked in.
Right.
And so we had to just tone it down. And then as we get that foot in the door, as I call it,
Yeah.
then we start doing a little more and we test the waters. Hey, cool, she's handling that. That one day I think you did some stuff like with your eyes and you're like, I didn't handle that at all.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, so like let's back off. Let's give it the weekend. We'll
Right.
start it again Monday.
Right.
And Monday was a lot better.
Right.
So there's every case is a little bit different. Even if we
Yeah.
use similar exercises from
Yeah.
patient to patient,
Right.
everything is different. Just like your journey was different than the new patient I saw right before this, right?
Right.
Every nervous system is different and is going to respond different, which is what makes this so fun, right? The problem solving aspect of our job is a lot of fun because we get to know the person as they come back,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
And then we just get to have fun and solve puzzles along the way.
Yeah. I assume then people have different history that leads them to where they
time.
are,
Big time.
and probably different ways that it manifests itself.
Correct.
Right. The dysfunction.
As an example, people who have trauma and anxiety, they're always
Yeah.
going to take a little bit longer to heal.
Longer.
Right?
Interesting.
Because there's a lot of hardwired subconscious thinking that needs to have like skip on that tail end.
Right.
And there is a time and a place to heal from trauma.
So can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
There's so much in the literature and media right now about trauma, and and there's a range.
Oh, yeah.
So when you talk about what the effect of trauma is on your patients, I mean, what is that range? Because
Great question.
Right.
So I'll give you a couple different examples. And I read about this in our POTS ebook that is available. It's at pots.desertbrainandspine.com. So what I do is I give two different scenarios, right? So we have, like, you grew up in a great had a great childhood. I'll just assume parents didn't fight. Dad was very military, right? And then your behavior kind of ran off that.
My parents did fight a bit.
Okay. Was it like
Not
toxic,
perfect.
right?
Sometimes.
Let me ask you this. Did you feel unsafe?
No.
Okay, so that's if you ask that question, did you feel safe or unsafe? And then right in the middle is toxic without like feeling unsafe, right? So each level has another level of nervous system activation from a time where we can't really regulate ourselves yet. So our environment should regulate us, right? You're in a place where you should be super safe, things taken care of, you should feel loved, and that's going to be a good, solid, balanced nervous system. If you don't have that, you should just start turning up the heat. The more intense a trauma is, say a sexual trauma, that's going to be almost like 100% or a 10 out of 10 from the get-go. So how well is that system going to regulate? It's not going to regulate well. So when they become adults and their system hasn't found a way or nobody's helped them regulate, then those are going to be usually the worse off or the farthest down that we have to pull out of what I call the pit of misery. Right. And so the intensity of that trauma, the type of that trauma, and we'll call it the depth that it cuts. Right? It could be physical. It could be physical, mental, emotional. It could not even be you. It could be grief, the loss of someone. All of these things have different levels of like an anchor, so to speak. That would be the word that Skip would use, the anchor, right? What's anchoring this? And that determines the level of your nervous system activation on the fight or flight, right? And so you then listen to the history. How many more things like that happened, right? Did you get into bad relationships because that's all you knew? And then bang, 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 you've got this laundry list of things of like so I don't want to call them bad choices. Choices that were made that created an outcome only because your training showed you that that's how it was.
So can I offer an interesting perspective that I've observed? So a lot of my friends are all like me. I mean, this is what typically happens. High achieving, did really well in their careers, and in some cases married well. Had kids, didn't have kids, whatever. But when you dig under the surface and you find out about their childhood, you discover that there was a lot that was traumatic. And you think, wow, these were people that pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and kind of got on with life. They didn't dwell on it. They didn't seemingly let it affect them. And what I'm finding is a lot of people get to a certain age or life stage, and they're suddenly really curious about how that affected them. And sometimes it shows up in physical symptoms. And they suddenly are shocked that they're having all these issues. And then that causes them to kind of go back and ask those questions about their family and their childhood, and to start to unpack some of that trauma. You know, it struck a chord when you said, when your parents are fighting and you feel at risk as a child, right? Because I do have friends who've had situations like that. And you just sort of think, it doesn't affect me anymore. I've created a new life for myself for the last how many years. But it always has a way of showing up at some point when you are now under some kind of stress.
Totally.
Right.
And so I'm not a trained psychologist, but I understand a lot because of the types of patients that we see with trauma. And people tend to kind of fall in a couple of different boats, right? Oftentimes, I would throw a guess out there that a lot of these high achievers were often had to fend for themselves when they were young.
Right.
And so me doing it, if it's going to get done right, I'm going to do it. I'm the only person that I have to depend on. I'm going to get this done. I'm going to get that done. So they become very successful. You'll find that a lot with highly successful individuals.
Right.
Now, that behavior, going back to what we were talking about before, that behavior was created, not necessarily chosen, but it was created. There might be some choices in there too. But that behavior, if it's driving that fight or flight system at a higher level, it works great until it doesn't work anymore.
Exactly.
Right? And that's somewhere in there is burnout.
Yes. Yes.
And so everybody that walks into this office, it is basically stress until proven otherwise. Okay? And I could justify a car accident as a stressor physically, right?
Right.
Like a physical problem technically is a stressor.
Right.
But if I can't find somebody who's telling me that there's a stressor, or that there's no stressor, and they have a very significant problem, more than likely, what we've found is those people either quit or there's something so deep that they've never told anyone.
Right.
And we'll run into that from time to time. And I totally understand it.
Yeah.
They're not ready.
Right. Interesting.
They're just, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Like your journey might have been predetermined, and just keep on with it. I'm happy to help, or we're happy to help if you give us another chance.
Yeah.
But like that's the difference in those high achievers, right? The way they're wired is that would be my guess with most of those that you're talking about. And,
You're right.
And so,
You're spot on with that.
we have another case, and it was a really, really awesome case to work with. This person was a therapist. They unpack trauma for a living. And so that was their tool. And they developed a bad problem, and they were working through the trauma while trying to heal this problem. But all the trauma work was triggering to the nervous system. So that's why I'll make a comment to people, there's a time and a place to work with trauma. So we start working here, and I say, just do this for the first 30 days. Let's see what happens. There was a 50% improvement in those first 30 days. I mean, it was rapid. And then we came to a plateau, and I'm like, what the heck's going on? Well, I find out they started doing trauma work again. So it completely stalled out the progression that we were creating. So now we're looking at, does it need to be done? Absolutely. Right? Obviously, everybody's got some kind of trauma, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's little t, they call it, or big T, right? Everybody find a way to deal with it, but there's a time and a place. If your nervous system is flaring as a result of opening up Pandora's box, you do not need to unpack it just yet. We need to get the nervous system stronger and more resilient, less reactive, create more energy, create more like your resilience bucket, right?
Yeah,
Bucket of energy, so you can tolerate more.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, you're like, holy cow, I'm hitting new depths in trauma recovery. I'm getting, things are coming up that have never come up before, and it's huge.
Yeah. So I think in my case, I had started to do a lot of work on this after my husband died.
Oh, yeah.
And so that was part of the dilemma, which was, wow, well, I really unpacked a lot of stuff in my family, on both sides of the family. I really thought a lot about the way I was and how I wanted to be different. And yet I wasn't seeing the results on the physical side.
Right.
And that's my point about not realizing. A lot of us, I think, don't realize how disconnected we've become to our bodies.
Right.
And that there was a habitual, unconscious way that I was responding to stress with my body.
Totally.
That Skip and you and the clinic team helped me understand.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, but then I was ready-made. It wasn't going to cause a flare by working on some of this stuff.
Right. So
Right.
you're at a level where you were still like, you still had tolerance.
Yes.
Right. And because here's the funny thing for you guys that are high performers, you're firing at 120 to 150%.
Right.
So even at your 40% from that number,
Yeah.
you're still at 60,
Right.
70, right?
Right.
And so
Even though we don't think we are.
right. So like
Yeah.
your 80% to me is a lot closer to 100 where we really want to be out of your original 120.
120. Yeah.
If you take us 80% of 120, that puts you at 96%.
Right.
In your world, right?
Right.
So that's why I'm like, do we want to go back to 120% all the time? So like another patient, we talked about the 80% rule. She lives her life by the 80% rule, and she feels amazing now.
That's great.
She just doesn't overdo it,
Yes.
right? And so
Right.
that's going to be a key for you. Like,
Yeah.
don't solve it. Everything's not a problem.
Yeah.
Right? Everything's an adventure.
Well, can I offer an example? I had
Yeah.
a photo shoot scheduled last Thursday, and I wasn't feeling so great Wednesday, and I didn't sleep that great. And I thought, well, why do I have to do this tomorrow? I mean, she may say, hey, look, I can't move the schedule, I'm backed up, but it can't hurt to ask. So I asked, can we move the photo shoot to Friday? There was just too much going on Thursday. And she said, yeah, no problem, no sweat. It was that easy.
Yeah. And before,
I would have stuck to the schedule
Absolutely.
and just driven for making the schedule on Thursday.
totally.
So, small example,
Right.
but kind of a big effect if I could keep
Absolutely.
it up.
Absolutely.
So,
Well, I know you had a bunch of questions that you wanted to ask me. I don't think we have time to get to
Yeah.
those, but what I would suggest is maybe we set up another one, do a
Okay.
shorter, like little Q&A.
Okay.
And so, because she wants to unravel a lot of the science behind what's going on
Yeah,
here.
that's right.
And I would love to do that too, to help
Right.
connect some of those dots. So why don't we plan for that then
Yeah,
when
that'd
you're
be-
back in town?
that'd be great.
And we'll just get some of that done.
I just feel like there's so many people like me that could really learn from you.
Well, I appreciate
And
that.
so that's my motivation. And, well, I mean, other than I'm just curious.
Yeah, of course.
I'm just curious anyway.
Well,
So-
are you doing your book tour back around here in Phoenix?
I'm going to come back probably in October.
Okay.
Because that's when the book will
Yeah.
release. And I think we'll do sort of like a bookstore event and
Wonderful.
a TV appearance.
Well,
if
you
we
just
can
let
do
us
that.
know, and we'd love to
Yeah.
be there to support you.
Yeah, great. Thanks,
Well,
Dr. Teams.
Jenny, it's been wonderful working with you,
Yeah.
watching you come out from that pit of misery.
Yeah.
And, we might still have a little work to do, but you've
Right.
done amazing work on yourself so
Well,
far.
thank you.
And I think our time together is coming close to maybe not needing us as much anymore, right? So
Yeah.
after next week, I think we'll probably be more of like on a check-in basis. So
Yeah.
I'm excited to see how
Yeah.
far you can
Well,
go.
thank you so much
Yeah.
from the bottom of my heart. I mean, really, this has been a tremendous experience, and you've got a fantastic team.
Well, thank you.
Here,
We
really.
couldn't do it without a team. So
Yeah.
they are the rock of this office. So I just I don't know, bought the microphones, I guess. But anyway,
You brought the team in, so you hired them.
Yeah.
They're awesome.
they're good people.
They're
So
awesome.
if you guys out there feel like any of this resonated with you, or you're really looking for maybe something different in the approach to healing, maybe you could just give us a call. If this, if Jenny touched on some points that you think, you know what, I'm going to give this a try, give us a call. We'll talk through your case and see what might be best for you to see if we can help. But otherwise, thank you for sitting through another episode of the Neuro Reset Podcast. I'm Dr. Teams. Thank you, Jenny, and we'll see you next time.